The snow fell in heavy, silent curtains, a shroud over the sleeping world. To the mortal eye, the forests of Vermont were dark and treacherous, a place where the cold could steal the breath from your lungs in minutes, turning bone to brittle ice. But Ilara moved through them as if she were a part of the night itself, a whisper given form. The cold was not her enemy. It was her kin. It was the absence of the frantic, messy warmth that defined the human world. The snow did not crunch beneath her high-laced boots. It yielded, parting for her as if acknowledging a superior, more ancient cold. She was a creature of stillness and shadow, her existence a long, unbroken line of midnights stretching back centuries. Time, for her, was not a river, flowing relentlessly forward. It was a frozen ocean, vast and unchanging. She had seen empires rise from dust and crumble back into it. She had watched the stars shift in the sky, the slow, ponderous dance of constellations, their patterns as familiar to her as the lines on a forgotten lover's hand. And through it all, she had remained, unchanging, unfeeling, almost. From the ridge, she could see Willow Creek huddled in the valley below. It was a speck of light in the vast, untamed darkness, a small town gathered against the green mountains. Its people were brief, hurried flames, flickering with lives of baffling urgency, their loves, their fears, their petty squabbles, all of it burning out in a few short decades. From this distance, she could smell them. The cozy, acrid scent of wood smoke from their chimneys, the savory smell of their evening meals, smells of family, of community, of a life she could observe but never ever join. Ilara usually avoided such places. The sounds were too sharp, the smells too thick. The pulsing, rhythmic thump of so much life gathered in one place was a discordant symphony that grated on her senses. It was a constant, nagging reminder of the thirst that was her only true companion, a low, patient hum beneath the surface of her being. But Willow Creek held the one thing in this world, this new, loud, electric world, that tethered her to the humanity she had long since shed. She skirted the edge of the town, her movements a liquid shadow. The wrought iron fence of the Willow Creek Cemetery appeared through the trees, its black spires like skeletal fingers clawing at the moonlit sky. The hinges of the gate, rusted by a century of rain and snow, did not protest as she passed through. They wouldn't dare. Silence was her domain. This place was a library of the dead, and she knew most of its volumes by heart. She walked past the grand, ostentatious mausoleums of the town's founding families, the Pattersons, the Bishops, names she recognized. She remembered Old Man Patterson, now immortalized in angelic marble, as a terrified, pimply boy who had fainted at the sight of a dead deer. She passed the simple, leaning markers of farmers and merchants, their stories lost to the wind, their names effaced by time and ice. Her destination was at the far edge, beneath the sweeping boughs of a great oak tree that had been old when her son was just a boy. The headstone was simple granite, worn by time, the name barely legible beneath a dusting of fresh snow. Julian, no last name. No dates, just his name. It was all she had allowed. His father, a fleeting warmth in her long, cold life, was a forgotten memory, a wisp of smoke from a fire long extinguished. But Julian was a wound that would not close, a single, perfect ember she shielded from the ice of eternity. He was her child, her mortal child, the impossible, beautiful accident of a life she had tried to live in the sun, a foolish, sun-drenched century of denial. She had watched him grow, a miracle of noise and warmth and skinned knees. She had watched him become a man, his heart filled with a baffling, reckless compassion for the very creatures she saw as little more than sustenance. He had become a doctor, his life dedicated to staving off the very inevitability she represented. And she had watched him die. It was not the glorious death of a soldier or the dramatic end of a poet. It was a simple, mundane human failure, a fever that burned through him, a sickness of the lungs she, with all her unholy power, could not halt. She could rip a tree from the earth, shatter stone with a whisper, but she could not mend the delicate, failing tissue of his mortal body. Her immortal blood, a cure for so many of her own kind's afflictions, was poison to his. She had held his hand as the warmth fled, his skin going from fiery hot to waxen cold. She had watched the light fade from his eyes, leaving him as cold as she, and in that moment, the frozen ocean of her existence had finally, agonizingly, cracked. Ilara knelt, her gloved fingers, black leather against white snow, brushing the frozen dust from the carved letters. This was her ritual, her penance, her one concession to the past. Here, in the absolute silence, under the indifferent gaze of the moon, she allowed herself to remember. The scent of his hair when he was a boy, smelling of soap and sunshine. The sound of his laugh, a bright, clear note in her dark, silent world. The agonizing, impossible weight of his small, warm body in her immortal arms. Tonight, the silence was broken. It was not the snap of a twig or the hoot of an owl. It was a sound that had no place here, a sound of a living, breaking heart, a thin, desperate sound that cut through the frozen air like a shard of glass. A human sob. Ilara was on her feet in an instant. It was not a human movement, hurried or startled. It was a fluid, silent ascent, as if the shadows were simply pulling her upright. Every sense, dormant and muted by memory, flared to agonizing life. She was no longer a grieving mother. She was a predator. Who? This was her place, her sanctuary. The intrusion was a violation, a sacrilege. Her eyes pierced the darkness, the snowflakes appearing to hang motionless in the air as her focus sharpened. The world, moments before a monochrome of gray memory, snapped into hypersensitive detail. The air, clean and sharp with pine and frost, was now tainted. She could smell it. The copper and salt tang of human blood, the sour chemical scent of sickness, the sharp ammoniac sting of fear. 2 heartbeats, one a frantic arrhythmic pounding, a rabbit in a snare. The other was dangerously slow, thready, stumbling, a broken-winged bird, fluttering its last. She melted into the deeper shadow of the great oak, becoming just another patch of darkness, indistinguishable from the ancient trunk. From here, she could see them. A woman was huddled against the far side of Julian's headstone, as if trying to draw warmth or protection from the very stone Ilara had just touched. She was young, heartbreakingly young, wrapped in a thin coat that was no match for the mounting Vermont winter. In her arms, she clutched a small bundle of worn blankets. From within the bundle, a small, pale face was visible. A child. A girl. The woman was weeping, her shoulders shaking in violent, uncontrolled spasms. "It's okay, Lily," she whispered, her voice cracking, the words ripped away by the wind. "It's okay, baby. We're here. We're at the place I told you about. The good place." Ilara watched, her initial annoyance hardening into a cold, dangerous curiosity. Why here? Of all the graves in this cemetery, hundreds of them, why this one? The woman shivered, pulling the bundle tighter, her knuckles white. This is where the good doctor is buried, sweetheart. The one Grandma Sarah always told us about. Your namesake. Ilara's breath, which she did not need, caught in her chest. The world seemed to tilt. What did she say? He was a good man, the woman continued, her words tumbling out between sobs, addressed more to the grave than to the child. My great-great-grandmother, Anna. She said the fever was taking the whole town. Everyone was dying. They were boarding up the houses. But he came, Dr. Julian. He was new, from the city. He didn't have to stay. But he did. He stayed. He didn't sleep. He just saved them. Ilara stood frozen, a statue of ice and shadow. Her mind, her perfect crystalline memory, raced, sifting through the decades. She remembered. An influenza. Virulent and fast. Julian had been there. She had come for him, materialized in his small clinic, her voice low and urgent. Leave this place. These people are not your concern. Let them die. He had looked at her, his face gaunt with exhaustion, his eyes burning with that infuriating fire she had never been able to extinguish. They are my concern, he had said. Go, mother. Your world has no place here. He saved her, Lily. The woman wept, rocking the small, still form in her arms. He saved our whole family. She told me if you ever needed a miracle, you come here. You come and you ask Dr. Julian. Because he was a saint. A saint. The word was a physical blow. Ilara stared at the simple granite stone. To her, it was a monument to her greatest failure, her most profound private loss. To this woman, this stranger, it was a shrine, a place of hope. She saw Julian's face in her mind, his earnest eyes, his stubborn chin, his unshakable belief in goodness. He had known what she was, he had loved her anyway, and he had spent his entire fleeting life trying to counterbalance the darkness she represented, as if his small, warm light could hold back her infinite night. Ilara had thought his legacy was nothing but dust and her own private, sterile grief. She was wrong. His legacy was this desperate, foolish, beautiful faith, passed down through generations like a family heirloom. The child in the woman's arms gave a weak, wet cough, a sound so fragile it was almost lost in the wind. It was a sound Ilara knew all too well. It was the sound of lungs filling, of a small body giving up. Please, the woman, Sarah, choked out, pressing her forehead against the freezing stone, her body shaking so hard Ilara could hear her teeth chattering. Please, Dr. Julian, I've tried everything. The doctors in Boston, the specialists, they said there's nothing more they can do. It's her blood. It's just not right. It's failing. The irony. A blood sickness. Ilara's focus sharpened, her preternatural hearing tuning in to the child. She could hear the weak, fluttering pulse, the shallow, rasping breath. The child, Lily, was dying. And she was dying at the grave of the one person Ilara had ever loved. Sarah's prayer became a desperate, primal wail. I don't know what else to do. I have no one else. I have nowhere else to go. She's all I have. Please. Save her. Save my little girl. Send a sign. Send an angel. Send something. The storm was picking up. The wind howled through the oak branches, whipping snow into swirling funnels. Ilara stood in the darkness, the falling snow clinging to her dark hair and eyelashes, making her look like a marble statue of grief. The hunter in her noted the weakness of the prey, the life ebbing away. The cynic in her scoffed at the pointless, childish plea to a pile of dust. But the mother in her, the mother remembered. She remembered the agonizing helplessness, the rage at a silent, empty sky, The desperate, useless bargains whispered into the void. She was seeing her own worst memory played out before her, a grotesque echo in the snow, a mother at the grave of her son, about to lose her own child. The night was silent once more, save for the frantic pounding of one human heart, the slow, agonizing fade of another, and the howl of the rising storm. Ilara remained perfectly still, trapped between the shadows of her past and the impossible, agonizing choice presented by the present. To intervene would be to break every rule of her existence, to risk exposure, to invite a chaos she had spent centuries avoiding. To do nothing. To do nothing would be to watch herself fail all over again. The storm did not just arrive, it detonated. It was as if Sarah's cry of hopelessness had been a physical summons, and the ancient, indifferent cold of the Vermont wilderness had answered with a personal, malicious rage. The wind ceased to be a simple movement of air and became a solid force, a charging entity that slammed into the cemetery. It screamed through the iron fence with the sound of 1,000 tortured voices. The snow, no longer falling in gentle curtains, became a horizontal assault, a blinding wall of white ice particles that scoured the granite and marble, stinging the air. The great oak groaned above them, its limbs twisting, a sound like a great ship breaking apart. Ilara stood within this chaos, a pillar of absolute stillness. The wind tore at her dark coat, whipping her hair across her face, but she was as rooted as the granite stones around her. She was a creature of such profound, internal cold that the storm felt like a familiar, if boisterous, relative. But inside her, where no wind could reach, a different and far more violent storm was raging. Walk away. The voice was not a whisper. It was the clear, cold, precise dictate of centuries of survival. It was the crystalline logic that had kept her alive while empires burned and new, foolish ones rose from their ashes. It was the voice that had guided her from the shadows of inquisitors' fires in Spain, the voice that had pulled her from the torch-wielding mobs in Bavaria, the voice that had taught her the one immutable truth. Notice is death. This is not your concern, the voice continued, sharp and insistent. Their grief is a spark. It burns hot and fast, and then it is gone. You are the ice. You endure. To interfere is to invite the one thing you have avoided for a century. To interfere is to be seen. She watched, her senses clinically detached, as the woman, Sarah, fumbled with the small orange plastic vial. Ilara's vision, preternaturally sharp, had read the label moments ago. An experimental hematopoietic drug. A last-ditch effort. A fool's hope. Sarah's gloves, thin and soaked, made her movements clumsy, pathetic. She wrestled with the child-proof cap, her breath coming in ragged, steaming gasps. When it finally popped open, she upended it into her frozen, raw palm, shaking it with frantic, desperate jerks. Nothing. A single, small, white pill, damp from the snow, rolled into her glove. It was the last one, and it was clearly, hopelessly, not enough. A sound tore from Sarah's throat, a dry, agonizing sound of utter and complete defeat. It was not a sob. There were no tears left. It was the sound of a spirit snapping in two. "No," she breathed, the words stolen by the wind. "No, please. I thought there was one more. I was sure." "The pharmacist," he said. She stared at the single pill, as if it were a mortal insult. Ilara's internal voice pressed its advantage. "See? It is already over. The mortals have failed themselves. Their own science, their own bodies, their own pathetic lack of preparation. This is the natural order. You are a spectator, not a participant. You are here for Julian, Not for them. Do not let this human squalor touch his memory. Julian. Her gaze drifted back to the simple headstone, now half obscured by a fresh drift. Julian, who would have already been at this woman's side. Julian, who would have taken the child from her, wrapped them both in his own coat, and damned the consequences. Julian, her son, her greatest strength, her most profound, idiotic weakness. I sold the car, Sarah whispered, her words no longer for the child, but for the grave itself, a frantic confession to the saint buried beneath. I sold it for the travel, to Boston. I sold Grandma's ring. I lied to the landlord. I promised them the money. But the trial. They said she wasn't responding. They said her body was too weak. Too weak. She's a child. The story pieced itself together in Ilara's mind, sharp and clear. A rare blood disorder. The irony was so thick it was suffocating. A blood disorder. Ilara, who knew more of blood than any living creature, its taste, its power, its song, its sacred life-giving symphony, was watching a child die from a flaw in its very essence. She could smell it now, beneath the scent of fear and snow. The blood in the child, Lily, was thin. It smelled wrong. It carried the metallic, corrosive tang of decay, of a body turning on itself. This has nothing to do with you, the ancient voice insisted, its patience wearing thin. You have turned your back on 1,000 such tragedies. 100,000. This is one child in a small town on a continent you barely recognize. Turn. Walk. The night is long, and you have other places to be. Let the snow do its work. It is cleaner this way. Ilara prepared to do just that, to obey the logic that had served her. She would melt back into the shadows, a ghost returning to ghosts. By morning, there would be 2 new, frozen mounds for the people of Willow Creek to find. A sad, brief story for their local paper. A human tragedy. Nothing more. She began to shift her weight, the first subtle, silent movement of departure. And then Sarah began to sing. It was a desperate, brave, heartbreakingly foolish act against the overwhelming dark. Her voice was thin, cracked with cold and grief, hopelessly off-key. But she sang, "Twinkle, twinkle, little star." The sound struck Ilara like a physical blow. It stopped her, harder than any barrier of stone or steel. Her non-existent breath hitched. "How I wonder what you are." Ilara's eyes closed. The memory didn't drift back. It slammed into her, as violent and sudden as the storm. It was not Vermont. It was a sun-baked room in a villa overlooking the Mediterranean, 2 centuries gone. The air was not filled with snow, but with the thick, cloying smell of lavender and carbolic acid, a desperate attempt to mask the smell of the sick room. The sound was not the wind, but the incessant, maddening buzz of cicadas outside the open window. Julian, 5 years old, was burning. A fever had taken him, his small body convulsing, his skin a terrifying dry heat. She had held his hand, his small, damp, startlingly human hand. Her own cool skin, which could soothe a burn or chill a wine glass, was a useless balm. And she had sung to him. Not this simple English rhyme, but an ancient, somber lullaby from her own childhood, a melody from the lost world of Rome, a song her own mortal mother had sung to her. Dormi, fili mi, dormi in pace. Sleep, my son. Sleep in peace. She had sung, her perfect, immortal voice never wavering, a flawless, crystalline sound in the hot, dying room. She had sung as his breathing grew shallow. She had sung as his beautiful brown eyes, the eyes of his father, glazed over. She had sung as the light left them, She had sung into the silence of the room for an hour after he was gone, because to stop singing would be to admit that it was real. The storm in the cemetery faded to a dull roar. The only thing Alara could hear was her own voice, 200 years gone, singing to her dead child. She opened her eyes. The present crashed back in with agonizing clarity. Sarah's song had choked off. She was looking down at the bundle in her arms, her face a mask of sudden, terrified stillness. "Lily?" she whispered. The wind had died down for a moment, a sudden, dreadful pause in the blizzard, creating a pocket of terrible, profound silence. And in that silence, Alara's heightened senses screamed at her. The shallow, rasping breath she had been monitoring had stopped. The thready, stumbling heartbeat, that broken-winged bird. She heard it falter. Thump, 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 thump. It ceased. The silence that followed was not empty. It was a vacuum, a cold, heavy thing that was louder and more terrifying to Alara than the storm's loudest shriek. "Lily?" Sarah's voice was sharper now, laced with a new, frantic terror. "Baby? It's okay. The storm it's passing. Wake up now. It's time to wake up." She gave the small bundle a gentle shake. The child's head, wrapped in a pink, snow-dusted hat, lolled unnaturally. "No," Sarah said. "Just a word, a denial, a plea to reality itself." She fumbled with the blankets, her frozen fingers tearing at the fabric, pulling them away from the child's face. Lily's skin was the color of skimmed milk. Her lips were a soft, pale blue. Her eyes were closed, fringed with tiny, frozen lashes. "Lily?" Sarah's voice rose, cracking. She pressed her ear to the child's chest, her dark hair falling over the still form. "No, I don't hear it. Wake up! Lily, breathe!" She shook her, harder now. "Breathe, damn you! You can't. You can't leave me. Not here. Breathe!" She laid the child down on the snow-covered grave of Julian. Her movements were frantic, animalistic. She tilted the girl's chin back and began pressing on her tiny chest, a clumsy, desperate, useless CPR. 1, 2, 3, 4, breathe! Please, God, please, please! But there was no God here. There was only the snow, the stone, the night, and Alara. No! The scream was not a word. It was not a human sound. It was a sound from the dawn of time. It was the sound of a soul being ripped in two. It was a sound of such pure, primal, undiluted agony that it transcended the human and became a force of nature itself. It was a howl of absolute loss, a sound that should not exist in any world, mortal or immortal. It was the scream Alara had swallowed. It was the scream she had held in her chest as she washed her son's small, cold body. The scream she had locked behind her teeth as she carved the name Julian into the stone herself. The scream she had carried, a cold, hard, perfect stone in her gut for 200 years. And here it was, living, breathing, tearing the night apart. Sarah collapsed over her daughter's body, her strength gone, her hope extinguished. She just wept, her body convulsing, her forehead pressed against the child's still chest. "She's gone. She's gone. My baby. She's gone. Julian, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." The internal debate was over. The ancient, logical voice of survival was silent, utterly annihilated by that one terrible sound. Alara had watched her son die. She had been powerless. She had been a god made useless by a human fever. Julian saved them. A new thought emerged, hard and clear as diamond. He saved her ancestors. His legacy is this absurd, beautiful human faith. And that faith just died. On his grave. She looked at the woman, broken, She looked at the child, still. She looked at the headstone that bore her son's name. I could not save my son. The thought was a blade, twisting, but I will save his legacy. The predator and the mother, the two halves of her warring soul, did not just merge, they fused. The ancient cold patience of the hunter combined with the white-hot, singular rage of the grieving mother. The cold, sterile grief she had nurtured for centuries burst into a hot, focused purpose. Her posture, once a study in detached stillness, changed. It did not become human, it became active. She drew herself up to her full height. The air around her seemed to drop another 10 degrees. The falling snowflakes visibly slowing and shifting in their descent as they neared her. Ilara stepped out from the shadow of the great oak, the snow swirling around her boots as if making way. She was no longer a spectator. Sarah's scream, the one that had shattered Ilara's long winter, faded into a new sound. It was a low, animalistic keening, a sound of absolute final desolation, the sound of a world that had ended. She was on her knees in the snow, her body draped over the small, still form, her own life seemingly pouring out of her in that one, final, hopeless wail. Ilara moved. It was not a human movement. She did not wade through the snowdrifts. She passed over them, a shadow detaching itself from a deeper shadow. The raging blizzard, a moment ago a deafening chaos, seemed to muffle, to pull back, as if in deference to a greater, older power. The snowflakes veered away from her skin as if repelled by an invisible force. She made no sound. In one instant, she was by the oak tree. In the next, she was standing over the grave, a tall, dark silhouette against the swirling white, casting a shadow that seemed impossibly dark, even in the dead of night. Sarah's grief was so absolute that for a full 10 seconds she did not sense the new presence. Then, a sudden primal instinct, the terror of the prey, an instinct buried deeper than sorrow, cut through her despair. A cold, far deeper than the storm, radiated from the figure beside her. It was a cold that felt ancient, a cold from the beginning of time. She looked up, her face a pale, tear-streaked, half-frozen mask. Her breath hitched, catching in her throat as a small, sharp crystal of ice. She saw a woman, or the idea of a woman. She was impossibly tall, or perhaps she just seemed that way, wrapped in a long, dark coat that did not move in the wind. It hung still, as if carved from stone. Her skin was the color of the moon on the snow, a luminous, terrifying white. Her hair was a fall of pure black, undisturbed by the gale. But it was her eyes that held Sarah, paralyzing her. They were dark, ancient, and seemed to drink the light from the air. In their depths, Sarah saw no anger, no pity, only a sorrow as vast and as cold as the empty space between stars. "Who?" Sarah's voice was a raw croak, barely audible. "Who are you?" She instinctively tried to cover Lily's body, her mind, fractured by grief, screaming, "Ghost! Angel! It's death! Death has come for her!" Ilara's gaze was not on Sarah. It was fixed on the small, still form on Julian's grave. The sight of the dead child, lying on the stone carved with her son's name, was a sacrilege that solidified her purpose into a diamond-hard resolve. This was not just a grave. It was her anchor, and these mortals had trespassed upon it with their messy, tragic mortality. "He is gone," Ilara said. Her voice did not rise to be heard over the storm. It simply was, cutting through the howl of the wind as if it existed on a different frequency. It was a voice layered with countless ages, an accent from no place Sarah had ever heard, a sound like velvet laid over steel. "What?" Sarah whispered, shivering, not from the cold, but from the impossible, terrifying presence of this woman. "Your doctor," Ilara said, her eyes slowly, finally, moving from the child to meet Sarah's. The connection was electric, and Sarah felt the last of her strength, the last of her will drain away. Her terror was replaced by a strange, overwhelming, dreadful awe. "He is gone, but I am here." "Please!" Sarah's mind was breaking. She couldn't feel her feet, her hands. "Please, I don't understand. She's gone. My baby is gone. My Lily." "Yes," Ilara said. The word was cold, factual, a statement of an observed truth. There was no pity in it, only a profound, bottomless acknowledgement. She knelt. Not a human genuflection of sorrow, but a fluid, precise, predatory movement, like a panther lowering itself. She was now eye level with Sarah, separated only by the small, dead child. Up close, Sarah could see that the woman was beautiful, but it was a terrible, sharp, inhuman beauty, like that of a perfect ice crystal. A beauty that had nothing to do with warmth or life. Ilara's focus was entirely on Lily. Her senses, now fully unlocked and screaming for release, went far beyond human. She did not need to feel for a pulse. She could hear the absolute, crushing silence within the child's chest. She could smell the chemical cascade of cessation, the unique, faint, acidic scent of mortal death as the cells began to rupture. The child was, by every definition of the world she had left behind, dead. But I am not of that world. The thought was a revelation, a key turning in a lock that had been rusted shut for centuries. For ages, she had lived by the rules of humanity to hide herself. She had let her son, her own son, die by those rules. But here, in the dark, with a witness broken by grief and dying of cold, in a place sacred to her own loss, the rules no longer applied. The ancient logical voice of survival made one last, desperate plea. Blood is life. Your blood is other. It is a curse. To give it is to break the final law. It is an abomination. You do not know what you will create. It is the only way, the mother answered, her voice now a roar that silenced all other thought. And his legacy is the only thing that matters. She had to be fast. Sarah was already fading, her hysteria giving way to the first deadly, insidious numbness of hypothermia. "You prayed for a miracle," Ilara stated. It was not a question. Sarah could barely form the word. Yes. "Your prayer is complicated." Ilara looked at Sarah, her dark eyes holding the woman's gaze, compelling her. The command was silent, but absolute. "You will not remember this clearly. You will tell yourself it was the storm. You will tell yourself it was a dream. You will tell yourself, your saint answered you." "I don't. Give me your child," Ilara commanded. The authority in that voice was absolute. It was the voice of a queen, a goddess, a creature used to being obeyed without question. Sarah, dazed, broken, and no longer in control of her own will, found her arms moving, lifting the light, cold bundle, offering it to this impossible stranger. Ilara took the child. The small, cold body felt like a grotesque echo of Julian in her arms. She stood up, turning her back to Sarah, shielding the child's body from the wind with her own. "Close your eyes, Sarah," Ilara commanded, her voice softer now, but no less firm. "Do not watch." Terrified, hopeful, and no longer in control of her own body, Sarah squeezed her eyes shut, burying her face in her frozen, gloved hands. Ilara looked down at the pale, still face of Lily. "You are not his," she whispered to the child, her voice for the first time touched by something other than coldness, a fierce, possessive anger. But you are here, and his legacy will not die tonight. Not here, not on his stone. She bent her head. There was no theatricality, no snarling, no bestial display. It was a precise, almost loving act. She bared her wrist, a slash of pale, perfect, blue-veined skin against the dark sleeve, and pressed her own fang into it. It was not a bite. It was a precise, surgical incision. Dark, ancient blood, almost black in the moonlight, welled up. It was life, yes, but it was more. It was centuries of power, of night, of an existence far beyond the simple, warm pulse of humanity. It was her life. She held her bleeding wrist to the child's blue, parted lips. A single, dark drop fell. It did not roll. It landed. It sizzled for one shocking instant on the child's cold lip, a sound like water on a hot stone. It was an infusion of life, but an ancient, powerful, different kind of life. A life that knew nothing of sickness, only of hunger and of survival. "Live," Ilara whispered. It was not a plea. It was not a request. It was a command. Live, and carry the story of this night. For a long, agonizing second, the only sound was the howl of the wind. The child remained still, gray and dead. Ilara felt a cold dread, a fear she had not felt since Julian's last breath. Did I fail again? Have I desecrated this grave for nothing? And then, gasp, a sound that had no right to exist. A deep, shuddering, violent inhalation that was impossibly loud. Lily's tiny body arched in Ilara's arms, a small back bowing as if struck by lightning. Her chest heaved. Sarah's head snapped up at the sound, her eyes flying open. Ilara turned, her face as impassive as stone, and placed the child back in her mother's arms. Sarah stared. The child's skin. It was no longer blue. It was not just warm. A faint, strange, vibrant flush was creeping back into her cheeks. Her eyes, which had been closed in death, fluttered. Lily coughed. A real, wet, living cough. A cough of a body expelling death. And then she began to cry. It was not the wail of a healthy baby. It was a thin, reedy, confused sound. But it was life. Sarah screamed, but this time it was not a sound of grief. It was a sound of raw, terrified, disbelieving, ecstatic joy. "Lily! Oh God! Oh God, Lily!" She snatched the child to her chest, rocking back and forth, her sobs now hysterical with shock and relief. She kissed the child's face, her hands. "You're warm. You're warm. Oh, my baby, my baby." After a long moment, she looked up, her eyes blinded by tears, searching for the impossible woman. "Thank you," she choked out. "Who are you? How?" She was alone. There was no one there. Ilara was gone. Sarah scrambled to her feet, clutching Lily, spinning around in the snow. "Hello? Hello? Where did you go?" There was nothing, just the swirling snow, the howling wind, and the empty, dark cemetery. She looked down. There were no footprints but her own. The snow where the woman had stood, where she had knelt, was undisturbed. A fresh, smooth blanket of white. Sarah stared, her rational mind trying to fight what she had seen. It was the cold. It was shock. A hallucination. A dream. But the child in her arms, now whimpering but breathing, was warm. She looked down at Julian's grave, the name now visible again. "Julian," she whispered, her voice thick with awe. You did it. You sent her. You sent an angel. Thank you. Thank you." From a high ridge, miles away, Ilara stood, the wind pulling at her hair. The storm was already lessening. Her preternatural hearing, clear as a bell, picked up the sounds from the valley. She heard 2 heartbeats, one frantic and joyous. The other, the new one, was weak. But it was steady. It was a strange, hybrid rhythm, a song she had never heard before. Thump, 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 a merging of two worlds. But it was undeniably, stubbornly, alive. She heard Sarah's whispered words, "An angel. Thank you, Julian." Elara looked at her own wrist. The small cut was already gone, the immortal skin seamless and pale. But she could still feel the phantom sting. She had given a part of herself. She had created, not destroyed. A strange, unfamiliar emotion settled in her chest. It was not happiness. It was not warmth. It was a quiet, profound, and heavy rightness. The crushing, sterile stone of her grief for Julian, the grief she had nurtured for 2 centuries, had not vanished. It was still there, a mountain inside her. But it was no longer just a monument to loss. It was now a foundation. She had lived for 1,000 years, a cold, unchanging, unfeeling stone, moving through the world while taking nothing and leaving nothing but fear. Her son, her mortal, fragile, foolish son, had lived for 27 years, a brief, warm, reckless fire. And tonight, his fire had changed the world. His legacy, his ridiculous human compassion, had reached through time and death to save a life. It had done something more. It had saved her. It had pierced the ice of her eternity and given her a purpose beyond simple, hollow survival. Elara turned away from the sleeping town, the first pale, hateful hint of dawn, her enemy, her curfew, staining the eastern sky. She melted back into the deep woods, not as a predator, and not as a grieving mother, but as something new. A guardian, a secret, a keeper of a single flickering flame. She finally, after all these centuries, understood. True immortality is not about living forever. It is about what you leave behind. And in the heart of that small, breathing child, now safe and warm in her mother's arms, Julian's legacy, and now hers, was truly, finally immortal.